To our first meeting for Cure Addiction Now, or CAN, C-A-N. This has been a long time getting where we are today, and I'm so thrilled we're here. And I know there's lots of people watching virtually too, and we're so excited where we are. This all started because my son, Jason Davis, who was the love of my life, the most precious person, had an addiction problem. He had it probably for 12 years off and on at different times. And we run another charity, and he said, Mom, we have to start finding a cure and medications and different ways of looking at addiction, because it is the most deadly disease in the world and nobody's doing anything about it. So we're going to do it. And we started this, and it was really hard to put all the right team of doctors and different people together to do this. Here we are today. Unfortunately, on February 16th, 2020, my son Jason passed away. So it's with a heavy heart that I do this, and I have some pictures of Jason so that this is what it's all about to me. It started with my son Jason, and I miss him. The idea of what a broken heart means is one of the most devastating things anybody could go through, because it never goes away. And I know that Jason is here today with us. So proud to see all these amazing doctors here. Carrying on his dream. Jason felt that he was fortunate that he could go get help. So many people that have substance use disorder cannot afford to get help or don't know where to get help. However, Jason said, and I know when he talked to this group when we first formed it, he said, my worst problem is cravings. And when you have this problem, you have terrible cravings. When you've gotten out of rehab or whatever you've done, when you've detoxed, there's a terrible thing with cravings, and we have to get at the root of this problem. And so some of the research that we're doing right now is all about that. We are funding 9 studies. We did this during COVID, so it's been a little bit, of a different time and more challenging. But I'm so grateful for everybody that's here on this panel today. I thank you for coming here. If you think about what has happened in the last 2 years since COVID began, it used to be that one person would die every 11 minutes of an overdose of opiates. Now it's one person every 90 seconds is dying from an overdose of opiates. It's pretty darn scary. It has gotten 10 times worse. With the introduction of fentanyl, I know everyone's been hearing about fentanyl. Well, fentanyl is the equivalent of having 50 to 100 shots of heroin at once. Of course, your body cannot take that. Most people are not buying fentanyl, but it's being laced into every single drug. It is coming over our borders from Mexico with the drug cartels, and it is being laced into everything from an antidepressant to an OxyContin to everything. If you ever get drugs that are not from a drugstore, you can be assured that 92% of those will have fentanyl, and they can absolutely kill you. I have my 2 daughters here today, Isabella and Mariella. They're teenagers, they're seniors in high school, and it's really alarming what they see. It's terrifying. We have to figure a way to protect everybody, all our kids, adults, children of any age, to understand that you can't take a drug that you buy off the streets from anybody, even if it's your best friend, the most reliable source that you've ever met with, or somebody you've been perhaps buying drugs from for years. You have to assume that something's going to be tainted and you're going to die. That's just how it is. Nobody can experiment. Back in the day when I was younger, people would experiment here and there. Not that that was right or wrong, but they would. And they did not have to worry that they were going to die. They might get sick. They might have different things happen, but now you're going to die. So we're here today to talk about that. We're funding some amazing doctors with Cure Addiction Now. And we're taking on a wide landscape. For 20 years, there was no really significant research that was happening in addiction research. I don't know why. It is now the leading cause of death for people under 50 years old. It has to be noticed. If you imagine every day, 300 people die of an opiate overdose. And out of that, 66% of them have fentanyl in that. So my husband made this analogy yesterday, so I have to thank Kenny. Imagine if every single day a plane crashed with 300 people in it and they all died. Don't you think we would be doing more? The FAA would be doing more, and they would be saying, "Oh my God, we've got to see what's wrong with the plane. We've got to research Boeing. This isn't safe. The hydraulic system, the engine, something's wrong." Why are we not doing that for addiction? This is the leading cause of death. We need to call it a disease. For so long, people don't want to call it a disease. It is a disease. Nobody wakes up one day and says, I think I'll have MS, I'll have cancer, I'll have addiction. It's something innate to your body. Some people can have drinks here every day. They can try this or try that. They don't become addicted. And other people can try something once or twice and it sets off fireworks in their head. Those people have a disease. They are not bad people. They have a bad disease that we haven't bothered doing anything to study for all these years. That's just completely wrong and unfair. So we're here to change the trajectory of this disease. We need to call it a disease. We need to stop shaming people that have an addiction problem. They are not bad people. They have a bad disease. And it's unconscionable that we have not done enough for this disease to help find treatments and cures, but that is what we are here to do. And in the name of my son, Jason, I am going to make this happen no matter what. And I appreciate everybody that's here today, everybody that is supporting us. I'm so grateful for absolutely everything you do. My two daughters who are sitting next to me, they wanted to start their own charity from this called You Can Save a Friend. I would love them to talk a little bit about You Can Save a Friend and tell you what that is and what they're seeing being teenagers. So here you go.
Okay, so yeah, we going off of Cure Addiction Now, Save a Friend is for everyone, but specifically for teens our age. It's a big issue right now that teens aren't informed. Before my mom said my brother passed away in 2020. He was addicted to fentanyl. I don't think I fully knew what fentanyl even was, and that's scary because it's on every drug nowadays. Teens want to experience things and they need to become informed. And even if you can't, that's why we started You Can Save a Friend, to inform people of the Good Samaritan law. A lot of teens are also scared if their friend is overdosing to leave them on a sidewalk at a party and run away and not even call the cops. And the truth is, no one should be scared to call the cops because of their friend. They should be scared to call their friend's parents and say that their kid had died. Another thing is Narcan, which Isabella just pulled out, which it's the most amazing thing I've ever seen. I call it like, what have I been saying? I've been saying like an EpiPen to give an example because that's exactly what it is, but it's in a nasal device. Here, do you want to show us? Do you want to explain what it is?
Yeah, sure. Okay. So kind of like what Marielle is saying, like how when you're having an allergic reaction, you use an EpiPen. When someone is overdosing, this is a nasal spray. So you just put it up their nostril and you give them one dose. And hopefully in the next 4 minutes, they'll wake up. And then if they don't, you give another dose. There's 2 doses in each one. And this has been like a miracle. I mean, I have seen people, getting Narcan. And I think we're really trying to get every person and business and school to carry it. I think every, health at every school should have it, every Uber driver, every business, because I don't know why you wouldn't have this around in case someone is having an emergency and you need to save their life. Yeah, okay. So with Save a Friend, we're working on trying to get the Good Samaritan laws in all states. Right now, they're in about half, and the law is you're basically legally protected if you are with someone who has taken drugs and they are overdosing, or really anything to do, and you're involved. Let's say you gave them the drugs, or you did the drugs with them. The Good Samaritan laws will hopefully protect you, and you won't be legally prosecuted if you call 911. And all really 911 cares about is saving your friend and not getting you in trouble. However, it's not in enough states. So. Oh yeah. Okay, so You Can Save a Friend works on both addiction and mental health. And we're really trying to work with teens to be more aware of what their friends are going through. If you think someone is struggling, whether you think they're having a really bad day and you think they're going to hurt themselves, or you're with someone who has taken too many drugs, don't ever be scared to call 911. I think in teenagers today, we are seeing a lot of stuff, more than usual. And even at parties and going out, I have seen people overdosing, and what's in their system is fentanyl, and they had no idea they even took fentanyl. It could be in Adderall, it could be in Xanax, it could be in different opioids, it could be in weed. And I think I want everyone to really be careful of what they're taking and what they're getting, where they're getting it, because we can't take a chance anymore.
Yeah, it's also become very normal to see people overdosing at a party. Is almost like teens our age, which we should never have to see our friends overdosing. It's normal to be at a party and there's an ambulance or people huddled around a kid on the floor, and they're like, what's happening? And they're just like, oh, they're overdosing, and they brush it off. It's really scary. It's really terrifying. And I think that we know a lot more because we've experienced it, because it's affected us. And people, or I guess teens, don't pay attention to anything that's happening with drugs because they think it's fun and they don't think it's harmful until it actually affects them.
Thank you guys so much. Now I want to introduce the amazing Dr. Kurt Rasmussen. I was so lucky in my journey when I was trying to find the best doctor in the entire planet, who could help me identify all the other best doctors on the planet for addiction. It was really hard when Jason gave me the task of just put this together, Mom. It's easy. It was so not easy. It was the hardest thing I've ever dealt with. And I luckily one day went to NIH or NIDA in Washington, D.C. And I was allowed to have a half an hour with every person that was the head of a department there. And I met him. And again, the thing with fireworks going off, they went off. He is, I don't know, the most exemplary, amazing doctor. He's the head of our scientific advisory board. And I'd like to introduce Dr. Kurt Rasmussen.
Thank you very much, Nancy. I am Kurt Rasmussen. I'm currently the Chief Scientific Officer of Delix Therapeutics and the Chair of the Scientific Advisory Board for Cure Addiction Now, and I couldn't be more proud. I'm both welcome. Thanks for coming. I'm both delighted and saddened at the same time for today. Saddened for the reason we're gathered here today. People are dying every day. We're in the middle of a horrible crisis and people are suffering. People are dying and the whole family is affected. We all know that. But I'm delighted that we're doing something about it. We're here to do something, to take action. This is tangible evidence of Nancy's steadfast commitment to making a difference. And I think this is a wonderful nonprofit. Please give generously. This is I spent a lot of time in academia, big pharma, government, and this is a niche that needs to be filled, that only philanthropy can fill. And I'm just so delighted. I want to introduce you to we've gathered some of the best scientific minds in the world to work on these problems. And we have a tremendous panel. I'd like to introduce them to you today now, and they'll be sharing their latest advances in work in this area. We have Kelly Dunn from Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine, Deborah Mash from the University of Miami School of Medicine. Matt Johnson is actually going to be virtual from Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. Roger Crystal from Opiate Pharmaceuticals. Paul Kenny from the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai. Jody Barber and Jason Waller, who will be our guest speakers. We're looking forward to that. Courtney Miller from the University of Florida Scripps Biomedical Research Center. Chris Evans from UCLA. Catherine Cahill from UCLA as well. And Adam Kaplan, who is the Chief Scientific Officer at MyMed Pharmaceuticals. And we've got a fantastic collection of researchers, and they're going to share some very exciting advances that they've been making in their research. So to start off, we're going to have Kelly Dunn give us a presentation. And I have to say that this is one of the research she's going to present is one of the most exciting developments in the past decades for therapeutic development for treating opioid use disorder. This is very important stuff. Kelly will be talking about the evaluation of a new FDA-approved non-narcotic, so a compound that's already on the market. You've even seen commercials for it on TV, for the treatment of insomnia during opiate withdrawal and its effects it can have. Kelly, please.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that very generous introduction, and Nancy and Kurt for organizing this opportunity to talk about these data. So I've been working in the field of substance use and particularly opioid withdrawal management for about 18 years. And I thought what would be helpful is just to provide you a bit of a background in the context of how that treatment system is organized. And then I can explain the results that we had from a recent trial, which were exciting beyond what we had expected to be able to achieve. So when individuals become physically dependent on opioids, which can happen if they are taking opioids completely as prescribed to them, or if they are using them recreationally or for illicit purposes, they will develop a withdrawal syndrome. And as they become more and more physically dependent, the severity of the withdrawal syndrome increases, such that when they want to stop using opioids, they experience this withdrawal syndrome. And to the outside observer, that often looks like they are experiencing a severe case of the flu. But it's very different to the person. It's much more severe to them. And it's characterized by changes in, well, there's anxiety, there's craving, there's, there can be vomiting, diarrhea, goosebumps, shaking, hot and cold flashes, and so on. And the experience of a person often is that with each subsequent day that they try to stop using the opioid, their withdrawal becomes more and more severe. And at a certain point in that experience, they stop being able to sleep most often. And then they can't sleep usually for one night and 2 nights and maybe 3 nights. And the inability to sleep compounds everything else, all of the pain associated with the withdrawal, all of the depression and mood disorders. And that's often what we've observed to be the point where people will leave the withdrawal treatment program. And there are medications available to help patients who are trying to withdraw off of opioids to help them sleep, but they're really not that effective, or they're not well utilized. And so when an individual, say an individual wants to, well, let's look at the treatment program. So if persons want to stop using opioids, we need to manage their withdrawal syndrome for them. And most of our treatment programs are really organized around the management of withdrawal, because if we can't get that under control, then it's difficult for them to focus on the other aspects of their life that they want to be able to get back under control. And so some of the medications that we have to do that are opioid medications like buprenorphine, which is often referred to as Suboxone, or methadone. And those are long-acting opioid medications, and they work mostly by managing the withdrawal syndrome. They don't eliminate cravings and other aspects of opioid use disorder. They're simply managing the withdrawal syndrome. But there's barriers to their use. And they are often given in a maintenance paradigm where someone would go in and receive that medication on a daily basis to just help them manage the syndrome. The more common form of treatment is to withdraw the person off of opioids. And this is short-term withdrawal programs are abundant throughout the United States, and they're the most common form of treatment. And it's the treatment that persons are most likely to interact with first, and that they utilize multiple times. And they are the treatments that are the most likely to be available for somebody in rural settings, or in various settings where there might be difficulty in accessing some of these longer term maintenance programs. But the complexity of these withdrawal programs is that there's no overarching guidance in terms of how to withdraw someone off of opioids. And although we've made great strides in our field to expand the use of maintenance medications, Suboxone and methadone, particularly Suboxone, we have not made those strides in these withdrawal programs. And if you look at data over the past 10 years, which our group has done, we've seen that every year we've been able to increase the number of people who are receiving maintenance, who are receiving buprenorphine or methadone as part of the maintenance program. But we've made no change to the number of patients who are being withdrawn with these medications in these various treatment programs, the withdrawal programs, with such that about 16% of people actually receive an opioid medication as they're being withdrawn. So what they're receiving, we're not entirely sure, because there's not a lot of overarching guidance or regulations to inform practitioners as to what they should do, but it's often various symptomatic medications. So if you go in and say that you're having withdrawal, then they treat your symptoms with, if you have muscle aches and pains, and you receive ibuprofen. If you have insomnia, then you might receive a medication for that. And so what our group has done is we're trying to really go back and look at the various symptoms of withdrawal and identify those symptoms that seem to be the most severe, or rather the symptoms that drive a lot of the behavior, right? So which are the symptoms that if we really intervened on these first and found medications that work, could we retain people in treatment? Could we manage their withdrawal effectively? And could we help them transition to other forms of treatment and to get through the withdrawal process? So sleep has been identified as one of those symptoms. As I mentioned, the insomnia that occurs during withdrawal is profound and is almost universally expressed or experienced by all of the patients going through that process. And it contributes to, it decreases their quality of life, it increases their pain, it increases their withdrawal severity. And it's, again, the symptom that we have found over the many, many years now to be the one that causes people to leave treatment. If you go into treatment for withdrawal, the medications that you're likely to receive are things that are not actually approved for sleep, because the providers are a little bit wary of giving some of the sleep approved medications, which are things like benzodiazepines or the Z drugs, Ambien and Lunesta, because they have a risk of interactions with opioids, a slight risk. And then many providers are concerned that they might also be misused. And so the patients tend to receive things like trazodone or hydroxyzine, which really don't have very much effect. And even in the few studies that exist that have examined them have found that they really don't work. And so the insomnia just remains untreated for these patients. And so recently there was a medication that was approved that has a very different mechanism of action. So this medication is called suvorexant, which is sold as Belsomra. And it's in contrast to other sleep medications that promote sleep by sedating the individual. This medication works on a very different system, and it promotes sleep by preventing the onset of the wake cycle. So it's a very different approach to being able to manage sleep. In the literature, when it's given to people in not just, general population, not just individuals with opioid use disorder, there's very low evidence that it would be misused, and it seems to have effects that onset immediately. So after a single night, you can see changes in the sleep patterns of the individual. And so we were really interested in looking at this medication in persons who had opioid use disorder, also because we recognize that there's unique interactions between the system that it's working on, the neurotransmitter system, which is the orexin system, and the opioid system that might make it even more efficacious for this population of individuals. And so we examined this by conducting an inpatient study in our residential research unit. We enrolled individuals who were mostly fentanyl exposed into our unit. They lived with us for about 11 to 13 days. We transitioned everyone to buprenorphine, Suboxone, which is the standard of care. And then we tapered them all with buprenorphine. So we gave them a 4-day taper, which is the most common duration of withdrawal treatment in the United States. And we did this because we really wanted to model what patients experience in a clinical setting, so that if we find a signal, providers see evidence that it would work in the context of how they are typically treating their patients. So all of these patients came in, we stabilized them onto buprenorphine, and then we randomly assigned them to one of 3 different groups. So they either received placebo, or they received the highest FDA approved dose of Balsamra, or they received double that dose, which was 40 milligrams, because we thought maybe given the severity of insomnia that these patients experience, we might need to push this dose even higher. And then we tapered them all. We measured their sleep using a forehead-based monitor that could measure their actual brain waves during the course of treatment. So that we had both, not only their self-reportive sleep, but we had actual evidence as to whether or not their brain had physical changes as a function of the medication that they were prescribed. And what we had hoped to achieve in this study was a 20-minute increase per night in the amount of sleep that people were able to achieve, because that's the standard that's been set by the field. That's the basis on which a medication could actually be approved by the FDA for sleep, right? That's the clinical outcome that you're trying to achieve. So we measured this throughout the taper, and then we kept patients for 4 additional days after the taper on our unit, and we're able to measure whether or not there was persistent benefits to them, whether or not there were persistent benefits. So what we found was that there were significant, our patients slept 90 minutes more per night if they received suvorexant or Balsamra relative to placebo. In addition to this, we measured withdrawal and other elements of opioid use disorder, including craving. And we didn't really know what to expect with this, but we thought maybe if we improve sleep, we'll be able to see some kind of a little bit of a benefit on these other items. What we saw was profound decreases in withdrawal in those patients who received the suvorexant relative to placebo, and also profound differences in craving. And having worked in this field for, again, close to 2 decades, I've never seen a medication reduce craving in the context, especially of the standard of care. So they were receiving buprenorphine as the standard of care, and we've reduced their craving significantly in that context as well. And I have to say that one thing that's not conveyed by these data are that I could almost tell when a patient was on an active medication when I went in to talk with them, because they looked so good. And the patients themselves would say to us, I've been through multiple different withdrawals and detoxes, and I don't know what this is, but I've never felt this wonderful before. And so it really seems that it's producing a positive effect. And the exciting thing about it is that there was no change in dose. There was no benefit of doing this twice the FDA dose. We saw the same effect regardless of what dose they received. So that means that the highest FDA approved dose could be given immediately to patients who are withdrawing from opioids, and it would treat not only their sleep and insomnia, but also likely reduce their withdrawal and their craving for opioids. And so this is a medication that could have immediate utility for patients. And I want to say that we're excited to be able to expand on this further. We've received funding from CAN, generous funding, to be able to look at this now in the context of persons who are co-using stimulants and opioids, which is the current wave of the opioid epidemic that we're experiencing. And it's a problem that's extremely difficult, and that frankly has existed for several decades, and we have never found an adequate solution to this. And we think that this might have real potential there. So I'll end there. Thank you.
Thanks, Kelly. It's very exciting work, because, as I said, that compound is already on the market for insomnia. And are you aware of any other physicians who are prescribing it based on your study?
So we published a study in June, and we actually received quite a bit of press related to it, and we have a lot of interest. We have a lot of people reaching out to us about it. The big surprise is that when you give this medication to when providers have been giving this medication for sleep, they have not seen strong effects, and so they've kind of written it off as not a very useful sleep medication. But our data suggests that it is particularly useful for people who have been chronically consuming opioids, and that aligns with our hypothesis. So we're doing work to try to expand the profile of this work to encourage people to do that.
Yeah, and there are actually 2 other compounds that are on the market now, have just come on the market with the same mechanism of action. So she's talking about Balsamra from Merck. There's another compound called Dayvigo from Eisai. And another compound, I just saw the commercial for it on TV the other day. It's from Dorsey. I forget the name for it, but there are non-selective orexin antagonists. and they should all have, strong effects. Now, they're not FDA approved for opioid use disorder. Got to say that. Ask your doctor. This is off label, but very exciting. So Kelly, thanks so much, and look forward to the future work. One thing I want to mention, if we're taking questions, if you want to submit questions online or in-house, if you wanted to write it, you write them on a piece of paper and we'll come around, collect them, and we'll ask them. All right, thanks very much. So I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Deborah Mash, again from the University of Miami School of Medicine. And she'll be talking about breaking the cycle of opioid use disorder with another compound you may have heard of, ibogaine.
Thank you, Kurt. I won't restate the problem because it was presented very thoroughly by Nancy Davis and by Kurt. But I would suggest that probably everyone who's here knows someone or has had someone in their family affected by the disease of addiction. And addiction and mental health is a growing concern in our society. Americans are becoming, as a group, sicker. We see that because of societal stress and other pressures on people. So this is really a mental health crisis. And the societal cost to us is estimated to be in the trillions of dollars. So we really need to be bold, and we need to break the mold and get out and make this a moonshot to come up with novel, new, effective medications for the treatment of addiction. So that's the problem. And what I want to talk to you about today is ibogaine, which is a medication that I've been working on for about 30 years when I first heard about it in 1992. And ibogaine is a psychedelic medicine. So, you know, there's a renaissance of psychedelic medicines being advanced through the FDA. And ibogaine is a psychedelic medicine that comes from the region of Gabon and Cameroon in Western Equatorial Africa. So this is a molecule that has over 100 years of ethnopharmacology and ethnobotany. It's an old molecule. It was discovered serendipitously, not from an academic medical center, but from a group of self-treating heroin users that when they took a drug of ibogaine, a single dose, that it could completely block those painful signs and symptoms of withdrawal described by Kelly Dunn in her presentation. But not only that, after the withdrawal syndrome was mitigated, they didn't express a desire to go back out and get high. So the cravings and the desire to go back out and use the drug were diminished. And some of them reported that they were drug-free months to years later. Now, I heard about this. And so I actually went, seeing is believing, and I traveled to Amsterdam to see this with my own eyes. Today, tens of thousands of Americans are leaving to take ibogaine outside of the United States in what we would call the gray zone of addiction medicine. And there are public testimonials that ibogaine is beneficial, but that's anecdote. That's not clinical trial GCP, good clinical practice research. I had submitted, because of what I saw with my own eyes, I worked with a very talented group of investigators at the University of Miami, and I went to the National Institute on Drug Abuse, and I told them what I saw, and I asked them to help to support this, and submitted a grant application. And long and the short of that is we got FDA permission in 1993 first, and again with a modified protocol in 1995. And this was landmark because people weren't getting FDA permission to test so-called psychedelic medicines at that time. But the bad story was that I couldn't raise the funding. And that is exactly, think of this, 1995. Here we are today. And this is exactly why the work that you're doing with Nancy Davis and this foundation is so important, because you're going to be able to help fund this and to translate these novel ideas and the good science to the clinic. We have to be bold and we have to be brave, because big pharma has not turned over their drug discovery pipeline to address this crisis. That's the problem. Why? We could spend all day talking about that and debating it, There are market barriers, but that's the fact. So the good news is that in 2018, I had a little crisis of conscience and I said, okay, and I left the University of Miami. I'm emeritus faculty now. And I took over a company that I founded, and I'm the CEO and founder of a company called Demerex. And working together with ATI Life Sciences, we are now funding ibogaine clinical trials, regulatory approved clinical trials. And we have a patient in the clinic right now. We're doing what's called a dose escalation study. And we're moving very quick. And what that means for us is that we will be able to come back. I'm doing the study. We are doing the studies in London right now with the collaborative support of the regulators, the equivalent of the FDA in the UK, but we're getting ready to put our package together so we can go have a discussion with the FDA. And we hope to be opening our IND in a phase 2 study for opioid use disorder, for looking for 2 indications, withdrawal management, as Kelly described, because we know that read on the internet, it seems to be very effective in any way. It appears effective. We have to prove it in a clinical trial, of course, but it mitigates the painful withdrawals. And what's going to be an important piece of this, because there are other medications approved for withdrawal management, is to demonstrate that there's a beneficial after effect of ibogaine and for relapse prevention. So 2 separate indications. Why does this work? Well, we don't know, but like other psychedelic medicines, it appears to be very effective for bringing about a rapid reset in the brain and turning on some neuroplasticity to help address the underlying neurochemical dysregulation occurs when your brain gets hijacked by drugs of abuse. So this has been a really long journey for me, but I'm here to tell you that I'm so excited and so proud to be part of the mission of Cure Addiction Now, because together with the talented scientists and compassionate clinicians sitting here with me and others working in academia and industry, we will cure addiction now.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Mash. Thank you very much. Our next speaker actually will be Dr. Matt Johnson on the video on the screen here virtually. He's from the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine, and he's going to be talking about a really interesting development in medication. As we all know, the old classic psychedelics have been investigated for a number of mental health disorders, but they're also being looked at stimulant use disorder and addiction as well. So Matt, if you can hear me, yes, you can hear me. Great. Yep. All right, great. Go ahead.
Thanks, Kurt. Yeah. And thanks for having me, and sorry to not be there with you in person, but thanks for importing me in digitally. Well, certainly thanks to the organization and all the organizers for the focus. Obviously, what we all share is that this is incredibly important topic for society, and thanks for getting my little 2 cents take into what I think is an exciting area for the potential treatment of addiction. So as Kurt mentioned, the classic psychedelics. We've already heard a bit from Dr. Mash about ibogaine. The classic which is a psychedelic of a different sort. The classic psychedelics include drugs you'll recognize: LSD, psilocybin. You may not recognize that, but magic mushrooms you've probably heard of. So it's the drug in magic mushrooms. Mescaline, which is in peyote. DMT, which you may have heard of ayahuasca, the South American sacramental beverage that's used by a number of indigenous religions. These are all in the same pharmacological category. They work by activating a very particular subtype of serotonin receptor. And so they're different, although share some similarity to other psychedelics, such as ibogaine and such as MDMA or ketamine, that work by fundamentally different, some is overlapping, but different enough mechanisms in the brain, and their risk benefit profile is different enough so that we can put those in a separate category. So they're getting to the classic psychedelics. There was some really exciting research going from the late 1950s and preceding the 60s through the 60s and then into the early 70s, exploring their therapeutic use for a number of mental health disorders, including, and one of the earliest were substance use disorders. So alcohol use disorder being primary. And there were a number of studies, 6 of them used LSD, which was the primary one of these drugs that was used as a potential therapeutic in this early research. 6 of these studies were randomized trials, randomizing people to either LSD or some other treatment. It differed across the different studies, but to treat alcohol use disorder or alcoholism, that was referred to commonly in the day. And in aggregate, as we know from a meta-analysis from over a decade ago, that even though originally these studies, it was sort of concluded to be a mixed bag, some showed significant results, some didn't. So maybe there wasn't anything there. That collectively, meta-analysis revealed that there was a substantial effect in treating alcohol use disorder. At the first follow-up, the people in the various LSD groups across studies were statistically had about twice the likelihood of an improved outcome at the first follow-up, and the timing of that follow-up differed across studies. But it was really a substantial effect size, as we say statistically. It wasn't just statistical significance. People were twice as likely to be substantially improved. I mean, this is the type of treatment you would have, that rivals, what we have today. This is in a very exciting category of findings. It wasn't just alcoholism. There was one well-controlled study, some limitations using LSD to treat opioid use disorder. These were heroin addicted individuals in Baltimore. And there were some real advantages to this study, even though there were some limitations. It wasn't blinded. The LSD group had a brief inpatient stay that the other group didn't have, but nonetheless, the difference is they recorded biological urine, analysis verified abstinence up to a year later, and that was not common in studies for the day. This was the early 1970s, and they found substantial increases in abstinence, biologically verified, urine verified abstinence a year later in the people that had gone through this LSD therapy. So that's the backdrop. A couple things I'll say about this before going on to the modern research, that what we mean by psychedelic therapy, what I'm going to talk about, is this model. It doesn't just involve using a psychedelic compound. It's explicitly using a very high dose, one that's, under medical supervision, it's sufficiently safe to administer under appropriate guidelines, but it is psychologically overwhelming. Make no mistake about it. This is not, a so-called microdose, which you may have read about in the news recently, taking, a very small amount of these compounds. This is an intense, psychological journey. Most people would say that's an accurate description of what happens when you give a high dose of something like psilocybin or LSD to somebody. And in the context of guidance for that experience, preparation for it, and an orientation to look towards this experience as a learning experience. And then there's so-called integration, which is really processing and discussion of this experience afterwards with a therapist. And then I should say guidance during the session, such that the person there are risks, and I don't have time to go into those, but we know a lot about those in these medical studies. Those risks are very squarely addressed, in my opinion, in a way that's very favorable compared to much of what we do in the practice of medicine. But when administering these compounds with that monitoring and with that support, all of those safeguards, that's what we mean by psychedelic therapy. And it's pay attention to the experience. And it's not like the experience is necessarily going to open up revealed truth to you somehow. I mean, it's just an experience, but often people find these experiences to be psychologically insightful and And multiple laboratories are now finding, at least in rodents, that there are multiple forms of neuroplasticity. These are the different ways in which the brain is actively changing in response to just the administration of these compounds. So what we may be seeing in psychedelic therapy in people with these high doses, a combination of these sort of insightful experiences that they could learn from, see themselves from a different perspective, combined with this sort of increase, possibly this neurologically mediated enhanced learning in the days and perhaps weeks following it. So in the modern research,
Excuse me, Matt. We're going to need to move on to our next topic relatively soon. Can we wrap it up when you can?
Yeah. So in the modern research, I dipped into the first time for tobacco addiction, published a pilot study that involved 15 participants, very small, wasn't much funding to do this work. Had extremely high success rates, biologically verified, 80% abstinent 6 months afterwards at the time of their testing. A year afterwards, over half of participants were continuously abstinent. In other words, they didn't appear to have even had a single puff after their treatment. It was an uncontrolled pilot trial, uncontrolled in the sense there wasn't a randomized control group, but we're in the context almost done with an 80-person study, enrolling our last participants at this time. The over 60 people that have gotten to their 1-year follow-up in that study are showing very high abstinence rates. We're seeing currently a doubling of the abstinent rates, a majority of participants a year out after their treatment, their target quit date, compared to a control condition, which is nicotine patch. That line of research has been paralleled very closely by work that my colleague Michael Bogenschutz, now at New York University, has done with alcohol use disorder. In fact, just a few days ago, published in JAMA Psychiatry, his phase 2 study, a randomized study of about 100 people, comparing psilocybin to a control condition for alcohol use disorder and reported a very large promising effect in decreasing drinking days and heavy drinking days in that population. So there's a lot of directions to go. There's numerous studies looking at opioid use disorders and that are about to start. There's work with cocaine addiction. We're waiting for results from these various studies, but so far with tobacco and alcohol, results look very promising. And the exciting thing is that it appears so far that this may be getting at the psychological underpinnings of addiction that might have relevance to a broad number of addictions across different drug classes. So
fantastic.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Great. Thanks so much, Matt. Really appreciate it. Our next speaker is Dr. Roger Crystal, who's the, as we all know, fentanyl is very, very problematic and killing a lot of people, unfortunately. And it seems to, it's such a powerful opiate, and his company is working on developing a new medication to help treat overdose from opiates in general, but particularly hopefully could address the fentanyl issue as well. So Roger is the CEO at Opiate Pharmaceuticals. Roger?
Thank you. Let me set my timer so I don't go over. So thank you for having me here. My name's Roger Crystal. I'm going to give you briefly my background, talk a little bit about what we're doing as a company overall, then give you some context as to how I see the opioid crisis and the state of opioid overdoses in this country, which, as a spoiler alert, is unique to the US, and maybe a little bit of Canada as well. Talk to you about the issues of opioid overdose today with what we have available, and then tell you what we're doing about it as a company. So about me, my background, as you can probably tell, I'm not from the US originally. I'm from the UK. I started my career as a surgeon, worked for a few years doing that, including a lot of time in the ER. So have very much addressed opioid overdose, if you like, on the front line as a physician. I then got involved in this company and I invented the Narcan nasal spray, and our company developed it. Thank you. Thank you very much. And that's been a real honor and a privilege, and really the driver for me and our company is how we can continue to treat addictions and drug overdose and not be complacent with where things are today. And what is going on? Well, it's interesting that this opioid crisis, as everyone knows, is really better characterized as a fentanyl crisis. And why do I say that? It's interesting interesting in a very unfortunate and sad way. If you encounter a young adult, 50 years or younger, lying on the street, unresponsive, it's an opioid overdose until proven otherwise. It's not a heart attack or something to do with diabetes, but actually it's a fentanyl overdose. 80% plus, probably almost 90% now of opioid overdose deaths are fentanyl. And with that comes some real issues. Why is that? Everyone's seen, I'm sure, the pictures showing fentanyl's 50 times stronger than heroin. But what does that mean? Well, what it means is that fentanyl is acting so much faster. We need to intercept so much quicker. Why did I develop the Narcan nasal spray? Because it was quite apparent to me that we needed something that everyone could use and was willing to use. And nevertheless, we need to intervene even faster because of what's going on with fentanyl. And the other issue is around re-overdosing, which is very unfortunate because of the longer action of duration, this longer half-life we have with fentanyl compared to heroin. And the real issues then, what we're seeing on the front line is that now multiple doses of naloxone are required to initially revive someone, and then this issue of re-overdose as well. So I'm not saying naloxone has truly met its match. Naloxone still works. Please continue to use it, but be mindful of the huge amount of naloxone that's now needed, which is why, why are we seeing more and more people dying from opioid overdose despite more and more naloxone being out there? It's because of the issues that I've described. And what are we doing about it? Well, the good news is there is another molecule that has been used in the past for opioid overdose, but it was way ahead of its time. It's called nalmefene, and it was approved as an injection, similar to naloxone, a couple of 2 or 3 decades ago now, but it was taken off the market because at that point we didn't have an opioid crisis and certainly not a fentanyl issue. So what we're doing as a company is bringing that back. We're bringing nalmefene back as a nasal spray. It will be exactly the same way that naloxone, the Narcan nasal spray, is used. But we believe nalmefene, as our nasal spray data support, has the properties of being faster, stronger, and longer acting than Narcan. So we've done a lot of work on this already. We tested, if you like, how quickly does our nasal nalmefene get into the blood. And it appears to get into the blood twice as fast as the Narcan nasal spray. Then we've looked at, well, at what concentration does it get into the blood? A measurement called Cmax. And that appears to be 3 times the level. And then the action of the absorption, the half-life of nalmefene is, a nasal nalmefene is 11 hours compared to about 2 hours with the Narcan nasal spray. So we've got that data that essentially shows you're delivering something that gets absorbed twice as fast at much higher concentrations and acts longer. But then we've gone, and I'm just going over by 1 more minute. We've got some data, so we did what's called a pharmacodynamic study where we went head to head with Narcan nasal spray on healthy volunteers. It was a very safe study. No one was going to come anywhere close to dying, but it was done in a very controlled laboratory setting where we essentially put someone into an artificial opioid overdose, a healthy volunteer. And in so doing, we then compared how quickly can we get them breathing again when we compared Narcan nasal spray to nasal nalmefene. And what we showed was the strength of the breathing response was at least double what we achieved with Narcan nasal spray today. But put another way, and I'll end with this. If you like, measured at 5 minutes. So think about it, time is brain. The quicker you intervene, the quicker not just are you more likely to save a life, but actually prevent longer term disability as well. So the strength of the breathing response we saw at 5 minutes, you don't get with the Narcan nasal spray until 20 minutes. So we're very excited by what this might be able to do. And just very, sorry, I said the final thing, one final thing. So where are we? When is this going to be available? We've started filing this product for FDA approval. We hope to get FDA approval in the first half of 2023 and then launch this product in the second half of
Very good.
2023. So good. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Roger. Really look forward to that being available for patients sometime soon. Now I'd like to introduce Dr. Paul Kenny from the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai. He's going to talk about current research about a novel chemical sensing mechanism that detects the presence of opiates and other addictive drugs in the body before they reach the brain.
So I'm delighted to be here. Very grateful for the support from Can. And I just thought I'd tell you very quickly what my lab does and a target that we're interested in. So I guess
Bring it closer.
like many of the other panelists, we're interested in how opioids act in the brain and then hopefully taking that information, that knowledge and developing new therapeutics. So if you use an opioid, what it does is very quickly, of course, get into the brain and it acts at opioid receptors. And the drugs that are available to treat opioid addiction basically act at those same receptors. Buprenorphine, methadone, Narcan, they all act at opioid receptors. So key targets. One thing that we noticed is that, of course, opioids come from plants. And pretty much every other addictive drug comes from plants, except that they're synthesized like fentanyl, but they have a structure that looks like chemicals that come from plants. And so they're basically plant-derived alkaloids. Why is that important? Many plant-derived alkaloids are incredibly toxic and poisonous. Why is that important? Well, the body knows that. Over the course of evolution, we've developed chemical sensors to tell us that you've eaten something or drank something that could kill you. You might want to be careful. And opioids fall into that class of alkaloids. Turns out there's a whole bunch of receptors in your body that can detect alkaloids. And if you've got mutations in those chemical sensors, you're actually more likely to be addicted to drugs and abuse. And so we were curious as to whether this whole chemical sensing system that's evolved to keep us alive and stop consuming things that can poison us may actually be involved in the addiction process. So with the support of Can, we made a genetically modified mouse in which the system no longer works. And the effects on opioid use in mice, at least, is absolutely enormous. So we've then moved forward with that research, found where these particular chemical sensors are expressed, and we've been modifying that system more directly, and yet again, enormous effects on the response of laboratory animals to opioids. There are compounds available to modify the actions of these chemical sensors, and we're trying to advance some of these towards human clinical testing right now. So it's an example of a type of left field project, if you will, that likely couldn't have been supported from using federal funds because it's so early stage and out there. So pilot funding to go after these kind of high risk, hopefully high reward types of projects is really key. And so we're very grateful to Can for exactly that type of support.
Thank you very much, Paul. It points out the different levels of research we are supporting. We're supporting clinical trials with Kelly and very basic information like in Paul's lab, which could lead to incredible things that we just don't even know about yet. So we've got a great group of researchers hitting the entire spectrum of research.
Can we also say,
Yep, good.
if anybody has questions, we're going to send somebody through to pick up if any has questions, and we'll answer them towards the end, whatever questions you may have. So if you could just pass them in. Okay.
Okay, now I'd like to invite Jody to talk about from a patient's perspective or a family's perspective on the loss and living with substance use disorder.
Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you, Nancy, for organizing this informative forum today. My 19-year-old son, Jared, whom we lost due to an overdose of prescription pills on January 8, 2010, was taken too soon. My husband and I woke up at 3 a.m. and found him sitting on the couch, barely breathing. Jared was in a drug-induced coma. His dad did CPR while I called 911. Jared passed away 47 minutes later at the hospital where he was born. His two friends tried to wake him while he was watching a movie at 12:30. He was snoring and they thought he was sleeping. But Jared was in a drug-induced coma. They had crushed an opiate that night called oxymorphone, also known as Opana. They cut the pill into quarters and shared. We drove back home to wake up his then 15-year-old brother. Today, Blake is turning 28. He lost his best friend and only sibling. Blake sometimes has what he calls waves of emotions. You see, Jared died from a deadly combination of prescription drugs. 3 of his close friends also died that same year. Young, sweet, talented boys with a bright future, cut short by prescription drug misuse. They died addicted to Opana and benzodiazepines. I couldn't sit back and watch the loss of all these young lives taken too soon, knowing it was preventable. So my mission began. I put up posters of 21 faces of kids in business windows who died, including my sons. Jared's friends told me where they were getting hundreds of pills. I immediately exposed the doctor on the news, in the newspaper, and on talk shows. Dr. Lisa Singh overprescribed 27,000 pills over a 3-year period. She is currently serving 30 years to life in jail on 3 counts of second-degree murder and 21 more counts. How did it start? My son broke his collarbone, dirt biking on vacation with another family. They rushed him to the hospital and the nurse gave him Vicodin. He soon became addicted to opioids. A psychologist referred us to a doctor. I monitored the medications and went into every visit except the last visit, just 2 days before Jared died. The autopsy report stated 2 clonazepam, 3 Seroquel, Cymbalta, and a quarter of Opana. At that time, CDC had found the lethal combination of benzodiazepines and opioids as the #1 causative agent of an overdose in the nation. Today, the streets are flooded with fentanyl. Teens as young as 14 years old are going online and purchasing what they think is a Xanax or an Oxycontin from Snapchat. They're getting these pills delivered to their door and they're dying from 1 pill, which contain fentanyl. Teenagers are going to parties thinking they are going to snort a line of cocaine and dying because it's fentanyl. Fentanyl is in everything sold on the streets today. Over 100,000 people died last year from an overdose. Most of the deaths were from fentanyl poisoning. Young adults who started their addiction years ago from the overprescribing of prescription drugs turned to heroin and now addicted to fentanyl and dying. As an advocate and on the front lines, taking calls from parents and teens, I see what is needed to save lives: prevention, education, and awareness. I'm so grateful to those who are trying to curb the epidemic by taking a stand to find solutions and following the FDA guidelines. I would like to see every nurse and physician mention the importance of carrying Narcan when prescribing opioids. A law I helped pass requires physicians to co-prescribe Narcan to at-risk patients. I am witnessing success with the MAT program, medication-assisted treatment. Vivitrol or Sublocade, along with counseling after a person is in treatment, is helping many stay clean. Narcan and fentanyl test strips, vending machines should be in every pharmacy as well as every high school and college campus. Narcan should be in every home and in every car. The Good Samaritan law can also save a life. A person who witnesses an overdose will be legally protected and not arrested. Very important to call 911. A lot of these kids died because they were afraid to call 911. We need grants for the MAT program as well as for aftercare programs. We need funding for billboards about fentanyl poisoning and overdose. We need televised public service announcements. We need to continue education and awareness events on the discussion of opioids and benzodiazepines, a dangerous combination, and the importance of tapering off slowly. We need more mental health facilities. We need the Deterra system pouch in every home. This pouch disposes your unused and expired medications safely. Too many obtain addictive medications from the medicine cabinet. My friend Brett Opie is a change advocate currently working to bring AVERD to the market, the first of its kind genetic risk assessment for opioid use disorder. We need funding for Cure Addiction Now, which will prevent deaths through new treatments, therapies, and ultimately a cure. Thank you, Nancy, for not only your tireless work to save lives, but also for continuing your beautiful son Jason's mission he started. Lastly, please watch the documentaries I produced called Overtaken and Overtaken 2. It's on YouTube and I have free DVDs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jody. Jason, do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, look, I want to be mindful of the time and the topics. Nancy, I just want to say thank you so much for being here and for having me here and putting together CAN. I was actually a part of the process with both you and Jason, who we miss so much in New York 2 years ago. And it was amazing sitting with a lot of you doctors here and being together to look for a cure for addiction. This is obviously a very cunning, baffling, and powerful disease. It is primary, it is chronic, it is progressive, and it is fatal if it is untreated. I struggled severely with addiction my whole life. It impacts about half of my family. But my story, just in a nutshell, is really, as a young kid, I can see ever before I picked up a drink or a drug, that I struggled with addiction. I had the self-esteem issues, the depression, the anxiety, accompanied with OCD. And at 11 years old, I would wash my hands compulsively until they would bleed. And I'd wear neoprene gloves at night. While on the outside, though, I was the popular kid, always had a girlfriend going in my early teens, was, a great athlete. And so I was living this double-edged life at a very young age. And, it's one of those things I always say, I had an overinflated ego with an underestimated sense of self-worth, projecting what I wanted you to see on the outside versus what I really felt on the inside. And lo and behold, I came into alcohol and it alleviated all those symptoms. And that was a very freeing feeling. And then from there, I was wanting to play baseball my whole life, had Division I scholarships, and I entered into a show called Laguna Beach, which then changed my life forever. At 18, we were the most impressionable, and again, is still trying to find and discover yourself. I was thrown onto the #1 TV show on cable while active in addiction, and it spiraled from there. So from the age of 18 to 23 years old, I ended up going into 12 different treatment centers from Florida to Hawaii, every state in between. And a part of my story is not contemplation, but actually attempting suicide. And so that led me, I entered into recovery, sustained an amazing life through that process, ended up having 5 years, lost sight of everything that I had done to maintain my sobriety. And found myself back in active addiction, where I was at the first floor at Hoag Hospital while my wife was giving birth to my daughter on the 4th floor. And so I've seen how this, being in the thick of recovery, because there's a big difference between being abstinence of drugs and alcohol versus living a life in recovery. And I got to experience the joys and the pleasures of being sober, but I also lost sight of what it was that I was doing to maintain that program. And it took me back. It let off right where it was. And so I'm just so grateful to be here with all of you doctors, researchers, and a part of this process, because I feel like psychiatry for so long has failed us. If you have something wrong with your heart, your kidneys, your liver, we do a scan, we do a CAT scan, MRI, we actually focus on the organ that is directly affected, versus with substance abuse for the last 60 years, we've just clustered symptoms and thrown medication on top of it. And there's so much more that can be done. And so I'm just grateful to be a part of this. Just so happy to be here and just love what we're doing here. And basically, the long story short, I'm an advocate and utilize what I've done in the entertainment business now and use that as a stepping stone to raise hope, give encouragement and motivation for those that are still struggling. And obviously I'm the secretary of CAN, and I also work at A-List Health Recovery. So thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Thanks for sharing that. Our next speaker will be Dr. Courtney Miller from the University of Florida Scripps Biomedical Research Center. And she'll be talking about the development of a single-use medication for the treatment of substance use disorder. Courtney.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. Thanks for your attention as we've been going through little vignettes of the things that we're working on. For mine, first, I should say I wear two hats. So one, I'm a professor at UF Scripps, but I'm also the co-founder and acting CEO of Myosin Therapeutics. I'll tell you how those two kind of go together beyond just keeping me really busy. For the last more than 20 years, I've been studying the role that memory plays in triggering craving in substance use disorder, and really studying it on the neurobiological level, trying to understand the brain plasticity that occurs as a result of using drugs, how it changes the brain and drives that craving when you encounter things that serve as triggers later. So the idea is if we can understand those changes in plasticity, maybe we can reverse them and put a person back in control. We can help them establish abstinence. Then you go back out into the real world, you're exposed to all of these environmental triggers. And that can lead to the craving, and it really totally overrides your decision-making part of the brain. It's a really immediate, instantaneous millisecond response of some of the lower parts of the brain. So if we can correct that plasticity, then perhaps, again, a person can be put back into control. So about 12 years ago, in my lab at UF Scripps, we made a really unexpected finding. And the short version of it is that just like we learned out in biology class, you have actin and myosin in your muscles, it turns out you also have it in your brain. And kind of the way it helps you flex your muscles, it also helps change the connections between neurons in your brain. And we found that there's something about methamphetamine that changes the plasticity of the brain, but only in this one part of the brain that's, we refer to it as the emotional memory center of the brain, and it's called the amygdala. It's the reason that if you smell an apple pie, you may be immediately transported back to baking with your grandmother. Well, it turns out that drugs of abuse target that exact same pathway. So what we found is that methamphetamine changes the way that this myosin operates in your neural plasticity. And it gave us kind of an Achilles heel to these memories that drive craving. So we found out if we, in our preclinical studies, if we inhibit that myosin and do it just once, it seems to be enough to revert the plasticity in the amygdala, so our emotional brain center, back to baseline. And in our studies, it took away the emotional, the motivation to go and seek drugs. Now, these are preclinical studies, and unfortunately, this myosin has no FDA-approved medication, so there's nothing that targets that. And so that's set up a little bit of a long road for us, but the fact that we're seeing changes with the single administration really gives us a foothold, because we're not talking about something that have to be given chronically. So when you're talking about safety concerns, for instance, it's not as significant as if you're taking something once, which is what we anticipate. So the NIH has been extremely supportive, and in the process, we founded Myosin Therapeutics to help move the medication forward, because in an academic lab, it's far too difficult to do the full drug development process. So the development is going well, and we've completed the majority of the studies that FDA wants in order to apply to run clinical trials. So we're at that stage, sort of negotiating with FDA, trying to remind them of what a significant problem substance use disorder is. And as I said, we found this result with methamphetamine, but with funding from CAN as well as NIH, we've been working on ways that we can extend this to other drugs. So we're finding really promising results with cocaine, but we're also hopeful that we may be able to make it amenable for opioids. We're also looking at alcohol and nicotine. And interestingly, we're also finding out there may be potential for people that use polysubstances, which is a large portion of people. It looks like if someone is using methamphetamine, we get this immediate effect, but it may extend to motivations and triggers they have associated with other drugs. So we're really hopeful, but we won't know until we get into the clinic. And I would just like to stress probably what Dr. Mash was saying earlier, one of the really big challenges for those of us in this field is the funding. So the NIH is really, really supportive, and that's about our only source of funding. So I talk about having a company, and it's really challenging because I can tell you that traditional investors out there, they're not going to take the risk, so to speak, for something that would be a treatment in the substance use field. We are also sort of moving in directions with similar compounds for cancer. And it's infuriating to see how the eyes of an investor light up when you start talking about a potential cancer therapeutic, but they shut down when you're talking about something for substance use disorder. So we are continuing to fight that battle. But thank you for coming to listen to us today.
Yeah.
Thank you, Courtney.
Point.
Great point. Next, we've got Dr. Chris Evans from UCLA, who's going to talk to us about the risks of taking an opioid.
Hi, thanks for inviting me. Yes, I'm a basic scientist, so I've spent most of my career trying to figure out what in the brain makes opioids work. And I started my career looking at these enkephalins and endorphins, which you've probably heard about. These are the small molecules, peptides, small proteins, which interact with receptors in the brain called opiate receptors. And this system is really part of our feeling good system. So it's involved not only in the actions of opiate drugs, but lots of other drugs. So it turns out that this system is really important in the actions of nicotine, alcohol, cannabis, and it may be actually important in the antidepressant actions, because antidepressants cause a big upregulation of this system, the SSRIs in the brain. And we think that this may actually be the mechanism of its action, the upregulation of this endogenous opioid system. So it's really important for us feeling good in our reward systems. And when you take an opioid, of course, it's going to make you feel good. Well, most people feel really good. But, you know, drugs have two mechanisms, two actions. There's the drugs, the acute action, but there's also this opponent process, which everyone's been talking about today, which happens with withdrawal. The brain changes with the drug. So you get changes in the synapses, you get changes in the way circuits work, lots of changes. And really, the bottom line is when you go through withdrawal, you get the opposite effects of being on the drug. So instead of feeling good, you feel terrible. Instead of having constipation, which you get with opioids, you have diarrhea. Always you get the opposite effect. So the bodies and the brains adapted to that presence of that drug. And that's true of all drugs. So the way I see it is that for medications, there's lots of approaches which need to converge to treat addictive disease. One of them is to try and treat this negative part which happens during withdrawal. And we've heard a number of, well, we will. I mean, Kathy's going to talk a little bit about that. The other is your brain has associated with the drug certain characteristics like feeling good. How can you change that? And maybe the psychedelics, ibogaine or some of the psychedelics could help reset the way the brain is thinking about the drug. How do you reset that? How do you change that? How do you tell the brain that it's not the acute effects which are important, but the long-term effects? How do you tell the brain to do that when you have this powerful antidepressant or anti-anxiety effects? How do you do that? And I think that's one of the questions. And I was really interested in what Kelly was talking about with the sleep, because sleep is so important for sort of generating that the new thoughts about the world and being able to consolidate our memories, et cetera, and that was having such an effect during withdrawal. I was really excited about. So I think that's a really promising area. But I really do think there needs to be a convergence and including the drug approaches. I think that we also need to consider educational approaches, and protection as well is really important. So we need a convergence of these approaches to deal with addiction. And it's really nice to see that this is happening in this foundation. So, and Nancy, that's good.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Our next presenter will be Catherine Cahill, Dr. Catherine Cahill, also from UCLA. And she'll be talking about kappa opioid receptors as a target for treating opioid use disorder.
Thank you, Kurt. And thank you, Nancy, and this foundation for the invitation and supporting our research. It's phenomenal. My research, this particular project I'll tell you about, wouldn't be funded without this foundation. And I think it has tremendous potential. So just a quick thing about me. I'm trained as an opioid neuropharmacologist in Canada. I held a Canada Research Chair in chronic pain for 10 years before moving to California, where I was at Irvine, and then joined UCLA in the Department of Psychiatry and Biobehavioral Sciences in 2017. But I'm really interested in opioid use disorder, and in the context of also chronic pain, but specifically opioid relapse. So we know that one of the things that Nancy talked about and others have talked about is the acute withdrawal phase, but there's also this protracted abstinence and this insomnia and sleep and the dysphoric feelings you have and the anxiety and depression after you stop taking an opioid can last for months or years, and it contributes to this craving. So and we know that also that 80% of people that start even medication-assisted rehabilitation will relapse within the first year of their treatment. So it's really important to try to maintain that. So that's part of the main goal of my research at the moment. And one of the targets that we've identified, and others as well, that may be important for this is the kappa opioid receptor system. So the kappa receptor, so it's an opioid receptor, but it doesn't produce addiction. In fact, it has the opposite effect of the activation of what morphine and oxycodone and fentanyl does. So instead of making you feel good, it actually makes you feel bad. It causes dysphoric states. It can trigger depression. It can trigger anxiety. And we've seen even through postmortem studies in humans that people who commit suicide have an increase in this protein in their brain. So not only that, but even the endogenous chemical that's in your brain that activates this receptor system is increased. So we know from people who take salvinorin A or salvia, I think probably people have heard about that in this audience, but people abuse it because it's produces kind of hallucinogenic properties. And we know that people who take this also, even though they can abuse it, we know that it causes depressive and anxiety symptoms. And depression specifically has been shown to be a target or a risk factor for opioid use disorder. So so I think Jason mentioned earlier that, he suffered from, some self-confidence issues and some anxiety and depression. And that led probably to some of his substance use disorders. And one of the things that we haven't talked about today is that opioids are really good antidepressants. They're never prescribed as antidepressants because of their addiction potential, but that is probably a gateway to actually starting opioids in the first place and becoming addicted to them. So this kappa receptor, we've been able to show that it's increased in opioid dependent states as well as in chronic pain. And the research that we're working on that Cure Addiction Now is is funding, is to really study target engagement of this receptor of novel kappa opioid blockers using molecular imaging techniques. So we do positron emission tomography, and I've teamed up with another colleague at UCLA who's basically a pioneer in this field, Dr. Edie London. And we've been able to, with the funding, make a new ligand to be able to study this receptor in the brain that will help then bring drugs to market and get IND approval for being able to use clinically that will block this kappa opioid receptor. So that's basically what we're doing in the lab. It's all preclinical at the moment. We've been able to study this new drug called aticaprant. Sorry, I'm terrible at pronouncing that name. But this drug was a drug that was fast-tracked through the FDA and shown to have antidepressant, not antidepressant effects, but anti-anhedonic effects. So anhedonia is the inability to feel pleasure. And its actions in the brain were in this limbic system, including the amygdala, that was mentioned a little bit earlier. So there's really a lot of promise for this drug. It was originally developed and hoping to be an antidepressant drug, but we're trying to promote it as a novel treatment for opioid use disorder. So that's where our research is going. And again, I want to thank you all for being here and being engaged, because I think education and supporting this so that, you know, people understand that addiction isn't a choice is probably one of the most critical pieces of this foundation. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Kathy. Oh, yeah, we're assembling questions up here, so please feel free to send more up front. Our last presenter today is Dr. Adam Kaplan, who's at MyMed Pharmaceuticals. And he's going to talk about the connection between mental health and substance use disorder.
After he's done, we're going to answer.
Oh, sorry. After Adam's done, we'll be answering audience questions, lightning round of audience questions.
Thanks very much. I'm going to try to go quickly, both because I don't want Kurt to start staring back at me, and also because sitting back here drinking coffee and water and going at the end means my bladder wants me to be finished at a reasonable time. I want to thank Nancy, the bravest person that I have the privilege of working with, although meeting her daughters, it seems like her daughters are, you know, apples that haven't fallen far from the tree. So I'm going to talk about the connection between mental health and substance use, which we call dual diagnosis. And basically, dual diagnosis means when you have substance use disorder and a major severe mental illness like major depression or bipolar disorder, anxiety, psychosis. In terms of the epidemiology, 75% of people with substance use disorders have severe mental illness, and 75% of people with severe mental illness have substance use disorders. Not shocking to, you know, hearing Catherine and Jason, perfect setup going before me. So the predisposing factors to getting dual diagnosis include the fact that there's a temperament involved for many people where they tend to focus on feelings, the present, not the past and the future, and are reward seeking. So you can imagine if you just want to feel good now, punishment doesn't really register with you. You are trying to feel good now in the present, how you might be predisposed or at risk if you are exposed actually to drugs. And it turns out severe mental illness often, you know, has that effect on people where it gives them this kind of temperament where if you're bipolar and you're manic, you just want to feel good, or if you're depressed, you don't really care about the past and the future. So these are things that are risk factors. Other risk factors include, or in terms of the dual diagnosis, the impact of substance use disorder on severe mental illness. So we know that people will, as we heard, use medications to self-medicate for their depression and the like. The problem is, even though alcohol, for instance, makes you feel good in the short term, as cocaine can acutely, these are drugs that tend to cause depression and worsen depression in up to 80% of people with things, stimulants and cocaine, and 20 to 30% of people with alcohol. And so you get into this positive feedback loop, which is you're depressed and you reach for, drugs to try to make you feel good, but that worsens your depression and you're off to the races. So, it's important to realize that the treatment implications of this is that you have to both treat the depression and the severe mental illness simultaneously. That if someone's depressed and you get them off the opiates, they're still depressed. If you get the depression under control and they're addicted to drugs, they're still addicted to drugs. So you really need to have both if you hope to have any significant impact in the long term. I'm actually gonna kind of skip some of this, but it's important to know that we're not set up for this. Only 20% of addiction treatment places, centers, and 10% of mental health programs have the ability to do integrated treatment. So you can imagine how if you have this, you're going to be in a very difficult place to find the treatment that you need. It's also worth mentioning that we have resource limitations, which is why Cure Addiction Now is here to try to, mobilize resources to come up with new treatments. But we're noting that we know that treating these illnesses decrease crime. So because, the drug industry is all about, guns and these kinds of things and violence, and people who are addicted are trying to get resources to afford their addiction, that it's been shown that one treatment center will decrease the cost of crime by $4.2 million, and it will cost $1.1 million to keep open. So it's important to know that there are many reasons to do this. It's the stigma that keeps us from doing this. So just to close, I think it's important to know from research that we know, this is your brain on drugs. What we don't talk enough about is this is your brain on companionship. So what do I mean by that? Well, there's a number of studies that have been done for the last few decades that have shown, if you put a rat in a cage and it has a lever to push and it will get IV drugs like heroin, it will keep pushing that lever until it passes out, and conceivably, for instance, with cocaine, stops eating, will even die. So everybody said, well, these are terrible drugs. It's all the drug. Turns out it's not all the drug. It's the drug in the cage. What do I mean by that? Well, when they have put rats with the same situation, but where they can interact in a social way, kind of in a habit trail environment, they will not become addicted. They will spend more time socializing. And if you take addicted rats and you give them a chance to either hit a lever that will get them the opiate, or they can hit another lever and get a non-addicted companion to come in, they will basically do what's called voluntary abstinence. They will get themselves off the addiction. So the key here is to realize that mental illness is a psychological cage and that people can be liberated with treatment. So to truly address dual diagnosis requires a team able to tailor an integrated treatment plan to the person using the drugs that simultaneously liberates them from their environmental and psychological cages. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Adam. Fantastic. So those are our formal presentations. Let's give a big round of applause to everybody who did it. Yeah.
Also, if anybody has questions for the last speaker, because I know a lot of them have to do with the previous speakers. Adam Kaplan, feel free to add those questions as well.
Yeah, so fasten your seatbelts. This is the lightning round. We've got a stack of questions here that are fantastic. Thanks. Keep sending them in and we'll get as many of the questions answered as possible. So this is a free for all. I'll direct the question to someone at first, but then everybody feel free to jump in. This one is for Roger. Where can we get buy the nasal spray? and what was the price going to be?
Where can you get it?
Yeah, where can we get and buy the nasal spray?
Well, firstly, so at the moment it's not FDA approved. This is nasal nasal bead. So it needs to be approved by the FDA first, and that I think we hope the first half of next year. But in terms of access, we expect access to be equivalent to how one can access the Narcan nasal spray today. Pricing, we've not said anything publicly, only to say that we will price this sensibly. There's no. I appreciate. There's a lot of price sensitivity in general. I think if I may just more broadly say that a lot of the issues around access is people being aware of how they can access Narcan nasal spray. For example, you can get it from a pharmacist without a doctor's prescription because there's a statewide prescription, and we envisage the same to be the case for nalmefene. There's also actually SOR, State Opioid Response Grants. So for first responder organizations, there is federal funding that's appropriated for this very purpose. It's just often there's a bit of disconnect between people being aware of this as well. But just to remind, we will price this sensibly. And actually, sorry, final thing is when one thinks about the cost per overdose, one of the issues, there's a lot of opinion around has Narcan pricing gone up. Narcan pricing has not gone up. In fact, it's now lower because of there being generics. But the cost per overdose is higher because whereas when we developed Narcan nasal spray, it was against things like heroin and OxyContin. One dose, maybe two were needed. We now observe that multiple doses are required, which hikes up the price per overdose.
Can I say something on
Yes,
that?
of course.
So I talked to the Narcan people and they said you do not need a prescription to get it. You should just be able to go to your pharmacy and the pharmacist will write you the prescription. However, when I went to do that in California, it seemed to be I needed to get a prescription from my doctor and it took 4 days to get it. In other cities, you'll look now, there's Narcan vending machines. They're giving it out in different places. And I gather if we write letters to our legislator, they will make it so that it will become more available in California, whatever city that you live in. This is something that everybody has to have on them at all times, no matter what. There's no reason to not have Narcan because if you look at the reality, if you take a drug and you pass out, basically you have 4 minutes to have some brain damage. You have 6 minutes till you're dead. But if you call 911, they're not going to get there for 10 minutes. So it's really up to everybody to be self-empowered to have, again, have Narcan right here, to have this on them and to know exactly how to use it. So it's not that easy to get, but we can do it, make a difference by writing our different legislators in California, wherever you live, to make sure that this is available. Because I'm watching them have these huge giveaways of Narcan, and we tried really hard today to get Narcan and didn't get it. So we would love that to happen for everybody. And there's no reason that everybody's kid shouldn't have it in their backpack when they go to school. Every Uber driver should be taught. A lot of people go out at night and they get an Uber on purpose because they're planning on partying. And a lot of those people pass out in an Uber car or whatever. It should be a rule for every, Uber, limo driver, whatever, bus driver to know how to do this and have it on hand. So that's, I want to add that.
Yeah, please.
Oh, really?
Can everybody hear what you're saying?
Okay. Oh, that's good to know. She was just saying that if you check online, the different pharmacies, there's certain ones that do have it and they'll give it to you and that pharmacist will actually write it for you. And a lot of them don't have it in stock. That's another problem because it took me 4 days to get it from a pharmacy that I use. So it's okay, the expense. What you want to talk about that? It's $65 when I did it. The second time I did it, my insurance covered half of it for some reason. So it was $30. I don't know why that is, but I see that this past week, there's a thing with Narcan. There's these great vending machines in different cities. We should be that city that has that. Everybody's city that they live in should have Narcan vending machines so you can grab it. And as odd as it sounds, everybody's kids should know how to use it and should have it on them when they go out to a party at night, when they go to school, no matter what.
I think another point I'd just like to make is that it's safe. Even if the person hasn't overdosed with opioids, you can still give it to them and not worry about hurting them. So it's okay to use it. I think that's something that everybody needs to be aware of.
Yeah, sure. Come on. This is the audience participation. Let's have at it.
No, it's absolutely safe.
You
You can't abuse Narcan. I could take 60 shots up my nose right now. I'll probably have a bit of a headache and feel a bit nauseous. That's about it. Absolutely none whatsoever.
It works the same way as anti-abuse, which is naltrexone that's used for alcohol use disorder. And people take that all the time. It's totally safe.
I talked to my pharmacy when I was trying to get it, and they said, well, it's really hard to get and you have to have your doctor write a prescription. I said, well, why? They said, well, we don't want to put this in the hand of drug dealers. And I said, well, why not? I mean, that would make sense. If the drug dealers had it and they gave you an overdose, that they could save your life.
Other comments, questions, please? Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Oh, another comment, please.
Is the fear that is put into when I leave here today and say to my 15-year-old nephew, let's get Narcan in the backpack, how do I say now we're gonna have to listen, right?
Yeah, and it's like saying, do I drive more crazily because of seat belts? You know, that's my retort to that type of question, and there's no evidence of that whatsoever, really. Yeah, I could go on, but
You really need to have the education go with it. Okay, this is not you by saying, look, this is to save a friend, to save a life.
Yeah.
It's not that you're going to go
Right.
and
this is not
experiment.
Get out of jail free card.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, peer to peer.
An education system.
Oh, peer education would be amazing, and every school 100% should be doing this. And my daughters, Isabella and Mariella, have just filmed some PSAs to try to show how you use it, and it should be playing over and over again so everybody knows if this happens to you. And it's like having you know, a fire extinguisher on the wall. You don't need it until you need it, and you should know how to use it and put it away. But if you need it, boy, it's there. It should always be there.
Well, Nancy, I just wanted to add too, I think it's important people understand with kids, the average age of first time use now is 11 and a half years old. That's the average. I mean, so when you really look at what these kids are up against, I mean, we look at how many kids just died this last year that could have been saved with having Narcan. So I think it's just keeping that in mind. We're truly up against something that's very, very tragic.
It's true.
Great. Okay. Love the participation. We got a microphone. We can bring your microphone so everybody can hear.
Easier. Thank you, Liz.
Well, yes, I think it's just sort of a system. That's like what I've seen in the industry. I'm talking about the education part. That's a great idea to do a lot of the engaged in the United States, especially the community, and then do it now. To show that the impact there is something we can do and sharing all that is something we can do.
I think first responders can help with that too. In Florida, the first responders, the EMS people who are have some medical skills can go into the schools and begin to do some of this and get increased awareness. So you may try in your own community at the community level to engage them.
All right, great discussion. Lightning round. Let's move on to the next topic. I'm going to send this to Kelly eventually, but everyone else feel free to jump in and I'll make a comment. Is cocaine and crack still the epidemic it was? I'll make a quick comment. Yes, in fact, stimulant use overdose is going through the roof. We've learned that the opioid crisis was actually an overdose death crisis, and it's gone through different phases. Originally it was prescription opiates, then it shifted to more heroin. Then now stimulant overdose use is going incredibly through the roof, and the combined use of opiates and stimulants as well. Can you imagine that? And as fentanyl is going increase, so stimulant use is methamphetamine and cocaine are still a big problem. In fact, I'll let Kelly jump in here. We've just funded some work for Kelly to look at combined use of opiates and stimulants, which is, I'll point out, the government almost never funds that because they want very focused work. Where on the street, poly drug use is the norm. And so it's a big miss, and I'm really proud that can jump in and fund work where it's really needed on this. So I'll let Kelly make some comments, please.
Yeah, I'll agree with that it's very difficult to have that research funded. We've tried for years and been unsuccessful. And so the funding that we receive from CAN will provide the proof of concept data that we need to be able to persuade the NIH, hopefully, to fund larger trials in that area. So the recent stimulant use disorder epidemic is both cocaine, but also methamphetamine, which behaves very differently. So in the past, for 30 years, there's been reports of prominent co-use of cocaine with opioids, and it's often referred to as speedballs. More recently, it's been methamphetamine. It's a longer acting drug. It's more potent. Cocaine actually is for years was the number one reason that people would present to the emergency department, the number one drug related event, and it would be related to cardiac problems. So heart attacks and other issues related to that. The problem with both cocaine and methamphetamine is that we don't have treatments, but then we don't have pharmacotherapies that work. And so, for instance, when you're combining methamphetamine with an opioid and it produces an overdose and you give naloxone, it only reverses the opioid effects, not the methamphetamine effects. And so we know that methamphetamine is it's very potent and it's very long acting. And so we really need to get ahead of this as quickly as we can. We've seen evidence that it's increasing in prevalence, and we're trying to learn from what we've overlooked, perhaps with the opioid epidemic and the onset of fentanyl, to get in front of this and try to put resources to it to prevent it from escalating further.
The number of people with meth use disorder doubled in the last 2 years.
That's also, Kurt, what about with Adderall too? Something working in the space that I do is pharmaceutical synthetic grade meth is Adderall. And I mean, I can't tell you how many young adults come in with an Adderall addiction. That's been something we've been seeing growing a lot through young adults, 18 to 25.
Kurt, if I could just jump in as well, related, especially to what Courtney just said, January will be 3 years with COVID. 50% of people at 3 months after having COVID infection will have a major depressive disorder. And fatigue is an often very common sequelae of having COVID. So it's not surprising to me at all that people are going for things that raise your mood and give you energy, that we're still dealing with this burden, not just from the infections, but the post-infectious consequences.
And we know COVID was a huge problem because of the social isolation. So it drove a lot of people to drugs.
Yep. Well, the numbers jumped from one person dying every 11 minutes before COVID started to now it's one person every 90 seconds dying from an opiate overdose. That's really significant what COVID has done to this crisis.
Great. All right. Next in the lightning round. So Kelly's work was on orexin antagonists. There's a couple of questions around that. And in fact, this relates to what we were just talking about. One question here is, any chance that orexin antagonists, that's what Belsomra is, and there's 3 of them, Dayvigo and the third, I can't remember the name. Any chance that orexin antagonists might work for alcohol use disorder? Before I let her answer that, and I would like Paul's thoughts on that as well. I think there's a chance scientifically that the orexin antagonist could also be useful for stimulant use disorder. Very exciting. The basic clinical animal research indicates that might be the case. But Kelly and Paul, do you want to jump in on orexin antagonists for alcohol use disorder, or anyone else? This is a lightning round.
So there's significant interest in looking at the orexin antagonists. They call them DORAs, dual orexin receptor antagonists, for alcohol use disorder as well as stimulant use disorder. Those trials, I think, are just starting, and it would be in the same context that we examined it for opioid use disorder, in the sense that it's targeting insomnia, which is the primary indication for the medication, with the expectation that it may also have collateral benefit to withdrawal and some of the other features that are specific to those substance use disorders. And probably because what we're starting to think is that the system, the orexin system, is just generally dysregulated following chronic exposure to a substance, and that the DORAs are able to kind of re-regulate that. And if in fact that's true, then it would have relevance across multiple different substance use disorders.
Maybe I could just say that in addition to the DORAs that you heard about, Balsamro, which is a sleep aid, that drug is thought to act at 2 receptors in the brain, and one of them is responsible for the sleep promoting effects. The anti-addiction effects may, to some degree at least, be attributed to the second receptor, which is involved in sleep. So with the support of NIH, Kurt included, we've developed a drug that is targeting this non-sleep component, and it's actually in human clinical trials at the moment. So it's a orexin antagonist that doesn't promote sleep, and in animals at least it seems to work really well. So we're about to move into human testing with that in terms of opioid addiction, smoking, and psychomotor stimulants.
Great point, Paul. I was remiss in not bringing that up. So Balsamro, it hits 2 orexin receptors, the 1 and the 2. Paul's saying that there's some in development for just hitting orexin 1 receptor and may have more specific effects on addiction and less on sleep. So there are several of those in development. Very exciting, very exciting. Anyone else want to jump in, or are we on to the next question? Any comments from the audience? Okay, Paul, while you got, here's can you maybe talk about nicotine? Do any of these medications help with nicotine, with addiction to nicotine? If not, is there a way we can make it easier for people to stop smoking? Paul?
Well, we just talked about the orexin system. That seems to be a very promising target for smoking cessation. For many years, some people here would not despise or deny that there's been opioid systems have been heavily implicated in tobacco dependence. Whether opioid targeting drugs can facilitate smoking cessation is questionable. The data are not very strong in that regard, but there are lots of things in the pipeline to facilitate smoking cessation, many of which are actually championed by Kurt while he was at the NIH. So lots of things that should be available soon, hopefully.
Can I add?
Yeah, please.
Sorry. I just wanted to add that I'm working with a neurosurgeon at UCLA, Dr. Barry, who is really interested in vagal nerve stimulation as a possibility for smoking cessation as well, which is already approved for treating epilepsy and other types of CNS degeneration. But we're doing this right now in preclinical studies using nicotine self-administration models. So it looks promising as well as a non-drug treatment.
And I'll just add that my colleague Matt Johnson has the first NIH-funded trial in about 50 years to examine psilocybin, which is magic mushrooms, for smoking cessation, following up on the promising data that he collected in his pilot study.
Great. Here's an important one. Buprenorphine, so Suboxone, and the heart of Suboxone is considered the gold standard for opioid use disorder right now. But one drawback is the need to clear opiates out of your system before taking this drug. Good point. Which lead to withdrawal symptoms. How can we do a better job of managing withdrawal symptoms for these people? Are there any drugs in development that might have the potential to work as well without the waiting period to start treatment?
So we are actually currently examining suvorexant for that same purpose now. So buprenorphine, it is difficult to induct patients onto buprenorphine if they've recently used opioids, and it's particularly difficult if they've recently, within the past 3 days, been exposed to fentanyl. So we're examining suvorexant as a method of bridging participants in transitioning, helping them induct onto buprenorphine, and then stay on buprenorphine, and then ultimately bridge them over to subblockade, which is the extended release version of buprenorphine.
Can I also speak to that?
Please.
Sorry. So there's a study in Canada on an anti-gout medication called probenecid that's also thought to be actually working by reducing neuroinflammation in the brain. But it's really promising in terms of being able to reduce that withdrawal as well. And it's already there. It's just that we have to do the clinical trials to actually prove it in humans. So that's going on now out of University of Calgary.
And I'll mention another drug I know in development, that and NIDA has funded as well. It's an old Lilly drug. It was developed for pain. It's an AMPA antagonist, and currently clinical trials are underway to treat this exact thing, to treat withdrawal symptoms when you take people off buprenorphine, clear them out. So this will help, off morphine or their opiate, treat the withdrawal symptoms, and then so they can start on buprenorphine or another medication earlier. So there are several things in development specifically for withdrawal symptoms. And I'll mention the ibogaine is also could have a role here as well.
I think one final thing on the buprenorphine side is that there's just a practical opportunity, which is when someone's had an opioid overdose reversed, if they have a existing opioid use disorder, then already they are essentially have their opioids taken out. And therefore that's where there's the opportunity to initiate treatment with buprenorphine. And I know that there are centers that are doing that. They're even looking at having it done in the field. So I see an opportunity there as well to expand that sort of access.
Great, thanks. Here's another general question. Why do people continue to relapse, whether it's 3 months, 6 months, a year? Many people won't tell you, but relapse is inevitable and it always happens. I'm sure we got lots of opinions on that. Anybody want to jump in?
Lots of views.
Maybe Jason's gonna.
I can, go, no, you, no, I want you to. You, I'm waiting for you.
With zero life experience, I will tell you, that's completely wrong. Why don't you start and then I'll throw something on from the neurobiology side.
Yeah, I mean, well, sorry. For me, I mean, a relapse is actually understanding it now, and some people may argue with me on this, and that's what I'd be curious about, is I actually don't think it's a part of recovery. I actually think it's a lack thereof. And so I can actually identify in my relapses the areas when I actually had the actively arrested disease and I was stabilized and I was living a life in recovery. Because for me, it's structure, consistency creates safety. And when I have a program that's developed and is in order on a day-to-day basis, and I abide by that because it is a daily thing, I'm able to sustain. But when I don't do those things that I have in order, I tend to fall back to old tendencies and behaviors, which then, because it's a disease that's centered in the brain, correct? And so it's when I go back to my own devices, that's when I start to struggle with that. But for me, I found with structure and consistency, it's when I sustain.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense in terms of my ability to fit into what we understand about the effects on the brain. And it's what you've heard about a little bit today is drugs of abuse take advantage of the pathways that already exist in the brain for learning and remembering things, right? So evolutionarily, we should be able to figure out where food sources are and remember them and go back and find them again later. Unfortunately, drugs of abuse are like a sledgehammer to that system. And so they hijack your memory and reward systems so that later on those changes are very long lasting, even when you've removed the drug, because your brain says that was something really, really important and I need to remember that. And it can be a lifelong memory. And so it means that you have these pathways, not just memories, but habits and stressful triggers can reactivate those pathways, which then take over sort of your decision-making processes like we talked earlier about. So that's why a lot of us are focused on through multiple different ways, trying to rewire the brain and turn it back to the way it was prior to drugs.
Can I just add it's a really profound, if you think about the number of times that you engage in a behavior. And so think about tying your shoe. Every time you tie your shoe, you tie it in a certain direction. And if you tried to reverse the way that you tied it, it would take you a long time. Every time you would have to remind yourself to reverse the order. And it would take you a very long time to make that your habit, right? So you're relearning over a habit. And when you're stamping that memory in so many times a day for so many days for so many years that it just takes a very long period of time for you to to learn new habits over that. And so that's it. From kind of a practical perspective, that's one of the things that we talk with our patients about why it's so difficult why you have to have relapse as a potential in the forefront of your mind.
I just want to add that, it's a chronic relapsing disease. So we have to get over the stigma of this, that we understand that people are at high risk for relapse. Period. End of story. And chasing the memory of the high, as we've heard from Dr. Miller. That's what they tell you. That's what people tell you. Why do I do drugs? Because I like them. Because they feel good. Because I felt better. I felt normal. How many times have we heard this? So this is why I get excited about what we're doing here, because what the themes that are coming up, you can almost imagine that you can use the psychedelic medicines to start the kind of regenerate, neuro rehabilitation pathways in the brain to turn on some of this neuroplasticity, and then have medications like this actin-myosin pathway that can then come in and renormalize that, have the kind of chemical sensing idea that's coming out over here where you can start to fine tune this. And this is what it's going to take. This is very complicated stuff. It's going to take a multi-pronged thing. And if you don't, once you get people off of the drugs, then you got to deal with the underlying issues, the trauma, the depression, the mood disorder that's protracted because opiates give you a long, a protracted abstinence syndrome. So this is why you got to come at it with, it's not going to be one thing.
Right. I couldn't agree more. There's no silver bullet here. Like any area of medicine, you'll take different medications. Addiction is a complex cycle, and we need more treatment options for physicians to treat different patients who are at different stages of the addiction cycle. This will take multiple medications. So everything that's in development will be useful. And eventually, the more options we get, the better the physicians will be able to.
And just to add one other aspect of it, basically all addictions hijack, among the other things mentioned, the reward center of the brain. And as a result, you'd say, oh, well, we should have things that, basically affect craving, because that's what the reward center wants. It's craving for that ongoing use and the positive feelings. None of our treatments address craving. We either, and remember, these are people who often, as a result of drug use, if not before that, want to feel better now. They want the positive effects to substitute to fill that craving. All our treatments either add punishments, remove punishments, but none of them are able to address the craving. And that's why years later, some people will relapse because they have that craving still.
All right, great. Let me push it a little bit into the policy sphere a little away from neurobiology and medications. There's a couple of related ones. Adam, I'm going to toss this to you, but other people jump in. One, how important is mental health care in treating substance use disorder, and what role do antidepressants play? Related question is, what are the policy implications that need to be addressed in order to make integrated mental health and substance use disorder treatment common practice?
Oh, that's easy. No, that's not, this is a major issue. If you look at where the efforts go, so if you look at the budget, the federal budget to address drug use issues in this country, 30% go to drug treatment, 60% plus go to crime, interdiction, preventing, the war on drugs, which is really the war on people who use drugs effectively. It ends up criminalization and the stuff. And the problem is that each one, mental illness and, the substance use, this bidirectional impact, has stigma associated with it. And it's just tragic. An example, this may be controversial, shouldn't be, but Anne Hesh, just recently died, and Nancy mentioned her friend and the like, and here's somebody who had both. And, she was just torn apart, Nancy and everybody related to this. So this is the double stigma. So, we can do this. We need integrated, care centers. But it's just going to take an awareness and resources and people saying enough already, with 107,000 people dying from overdoses a year.
All right, quick question for Dr. Kennedy. What would your research propose to do with the chemical sensing info? How can we use that info to help cure addiction and/or save someone's life?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I guess the system, just to put it in context, the system we're working on is that very same system. If you've ever smoked a cigarette and you felt a bit nauseous, some people can kind of overcome that, and some people smoke that cigarette and they never used them again. So it turns out that response to nicotine in the cigarette is mediated by the system we're interested in. And so it's really clear data in humans that and human drug users, that if you have a bad response the first time you use a drug, the likelihood of going on to become a regular user is lower. And so we have protective mechanisms in the body against addiction. And one of the major systems is this poison detector that I've been talking about. So what we'd like to do is to basically develop compounds that can facilitate or enhance or turn that system back on or turn it up in those who have mutations where it's not working as well, to decrease the desire to use a drug and hopefully help people achieve abstinence and maintain abstinence. And the good thing is there's already compounds out there that we can take to modify. For example, if you like a gin and tonic, the tonic water has quinine. Quinine is actually a chemical that comes from plants and it acts in the system as well. So there's lots of starting points to design safe drugs that hopefully will be effective by taking advantage of a natural protective system that we already have innate in our bodies.
Dr. Mash, do persons with varying biological makeups react or metabolize or react to ibogaine differently? As in the proven effects work in some individuals, but not in others, or opiate disorders and not others?
That's a great question. So I published in 2018 on ibogaine effects on not only opioid use disorder, but cocaine use disorder and effects on mood and cravings following treatment. And so I think there is some indication that it will have beneficial effects for those too. In looking at some of the other disorders, there's less data available, so we don't really know. In terms of ibogaine's efficacy, ibogaine across different biological makeups, that's a really good question too, because ibogaine is metabolized by enzymes in the liver and they're under genetic regulation. So they're what we know, fast, slow, intermediate, ultra rapid metabolizers. And because ibogaine is an active metabolite, noribogaine, a desmethyl metabolite, that also contributes to purported effects that we've observed in open label studies. So there's more to be learned, more to be tested. For opioid withdrawal management, ibogaine in open label studies shows real efficacy in open label studies, but we're going to test that head to head with our studies that we'll do in the US. But these are great questions. Genetic risk also is probably going to factor in there besides the liver metabolism, but we don't know enough yet.
Great, thanks. This is a general question, but it's for Kelly. How do you measure craving? I mean, and I'll take a step back and say, we all understand what we say about craving, but how do you know what one person experiences craving is the same thing someone else experiences
The
craving?
Hopkins checklist.
Yeah, so I know. How do you measure craving, Kelly?
That is it's a very challenging question to answer. So there's many scales. It's self-report scales. Often it's just a single, really frankly, one of the best measures is just a single item measure. How much are you craving on a scale of 0 to 100? And that's because of what Kurt mentioned, that there's everyone's interpretation of what it means to crave is different. So one of my colleagues is actually is really pursuing this more closely, where she's doing various interviews and eliciting craving and actually, and I guess capturing the various dimensions of what craving means. Because the problem is, one of the reasons that we can't find a good medication to treat craving is probably in part because we are treating, when we say craving, we're treating multiple different things, and people understand it as craving, but for some people it's urges, and for other people it's an avoidance of they're trying to avoid an aversive state of being in withdrawal. And there's multiple different aspects. And so she's actually charting out these various different domains. And then we'll look at them more, we'll develop questions related to them more thoroughly. And the whole pathway is meant to actually get to the FDA. The FDA is very interested in promoting a medication, approving a medication on the basis of craving, but they haven't been able to do so in part because we don't have a consensus as to what craving is. So this is she's kind of in stage 2 of a 3-step process to be able to do that more thoroughly. There are some fields like nicotine and that have a bit more sensitivity in terms of how they address craving. And it's often, one aspect is positive elements and other is avoidance of negative elements. But for many of the for many of the substance use disorders, we don't have very sensitive measures yet.
Great, thanks. Okay, I think we'll have one more question and then we'll start wrapping it up. Here's a general question. Anybody wants to jump in, jump in. What do you believe is the most effective way to break a familial cycle of substance use disorder?
Therapy? Therapy? I don't know. I don't have a great answer. It's a huge problem. And we don't even understand the genetics behind
Is
it.
there an epigenetics component in there anywhere, or anybody want to jump in, take that one?
Who wants to do the genetics? We're still learning the genetics.
I think we know that there
We
is.
know that there's risk. We know there's genetic risk, and we know that alcoholism runs in families, right? I mean, we know this.
I think there's a general approach to chronic disease where any chronic disease, there's a genetic and environmental phenotypic behavioral component to it. So appreciating our understanding of the genetics is still limited. I do subscribe to the fact that generally there are epigenetic phenomena, epigenetic meaning how the environment influences your genes and therefore manifests itself as disease. So rather than necessarily, this is a bit of a get out quick answer, but rather than necessarily being able to break the familial aspects, which I don't think we can do in the near term, it's how do we better manage everything around that better than what we're doing today. So I think hear from esteemed scientists around some phenomenal work that's going on, and therefore that I think will help address these diseases overall. And that's how I see things happening.
I just say there's this concepts of critical windows. So it's known that it seems really obvious that one of the major risk factors to becoming dependent on drugs of abuse is using drugs of abuse.
Yes.
And there's periods when you use them that you're more likely to go on and be a regular user. And adolescence and early adulthood, if you're exposed then, the likelihood of you becoming a regular user is dramatically higher than if you're my age. So if you're aware of a family history, I think making sure that your siblings, your family are aware that there's a greater chance you're going to become dependent. Again, I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but the science says don't experience a drug during these periods and you're less likely to become a regular user. So for those who have a family history, I think it's particularly critical that they minimize any experimentation, and they know that if they do experiment, we heard about this nuclear bomb going off or the fireworks. Your fireworks may be a little bit greater than your peers and you may be more vulnerable. So again, education and being really careful around critical periods.
Yeah, I think, wasn't there a study that came out that said if you don't use or drink by the age of 21, you have a 90% chance of never struggling with substance abuse?
Exactly, yes.
Yeah, and so I remember seeing that, and I think just from my own personal experience, like I said, half my family struggles with addiction and or mental health, and it was a disruption to the cycle. There had to be something that changed, and I mean, just an example from when I'm the youngest of 4 kids, and when I got sober, 8 of my family members ended up getting sober. So I mean, I think it also has to do with the environment and it's something that's got to give, and it's boundaries, and it's again, there's so much more research behind this, but just from what we've seen in my own family, it was really a disruption to the whole process.
I just want to add that another element of this is the early intervention. So, a lot that we've talked a lot about how individuals get exposed to opioids through prescriptions, and they, if they use them, some people really enjoy them for reasons that are, outside of the prescription. And if they felt maybe safer speaking with people around them or their providers about the feelings that they're experiencing or the fact that they're starting to lose control over them, then it would be easier for us to intervene at that point and to help them. But often there's such a stigma associated with them that people don't feel that they can do that, or they feel that they can manage it on their own, or they try to hide it, and it kind of grows, it escalates in severity. And so in our field, we're working really hard to try to reduce the stigma associated with it. So because that empowers a person to be their own advocate at a point where they currently right now, many people don't feel safe in doing so. So in that regard, it wouldn't necessarily break the full cycle, but it would help them intervene at a point where their treatment might be a little bit easier for them.
Great, thanks, Kelly. So I'm going to let Nancy wrap up in a second. But before that, I just wanted to thank you for your interest and your attention. Thanks for coming out today. This is an extraordinarily hard problem our modern society faces. And I hope we've been able to give a glimpse of the incredible scientific horsepower we've got here working on these problems, and the dedication and the enthusiasm that is there. And it sounds cliche, but I really think we can make a big difference. And I have every confidence that we will, as a group, do that. So thank you for your interest and support. Nancy?
Okay. First of all, thank you, Dr. Rasmussen. You have guided me to meet all the best of the best doctors and everybody that's here. And I'm so grateful to listen to the research that's going on. I know my son Jason is above us today looking at this and saying thank you, because this was his dream. He wanted to find ways of curing everybody in an equitable way with addiction. The group that's here today, everybody had so many exciting new things for me to learn. And I'm really grateful that we are doing something brand new that nobody's ever done before. And I don't know why for 20 years nobody did this, but it's the most important disease to find a cure for, and we're going to do everything we can. And I'm so grateful we have such an esteemed group of people, and the medications that are coming through the pipeline and the different ways of helping people are going to make a difference. It's not an easy problem, and it is a leading cause of death. We have to really raise tons and tons of money and fund lots and lots more research studies. They're very important. We're only scratching the surface here, and there's a really long way to go. It's just a wide open territory, but thank you all for coming, for listening, for the doctors who are putting their brains, their science, their everything on the line to make this dream come true. Now you can go.